This is Blacklisted Radio. It's the 4th day of October 2014. It's been a while. My name is Doug Owen. I am your host and senior editor of BlacklistedNews.com. I wear several other hats. You can be part of this show in a lot of different forms and fashions. All of the accoutrements that you need to be part of it are at BlacklistedRadio.com, including our live chat room where we hang out and we do a little pre-show gaming in the war room there at BlacklistedRadio.com, alongside the elite, the crew, hanging out there Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. If you are up that early and not eating bacon, you can be part of the show. All right, so lots of stuff going on. Lots of mixed metaphors, mixed messages, lots of crises happening, and as per usual, people freaking out across the globe, from Ebola here in Dallas, Texas, and popping up all over the United States to, well, the war on ISIS, ISIL, the Islamic State, whatever you want to call them. They have so many different hats that they wear and so many different things that they have at their disposal to attack us, mostly our weapons and our cash. So that's an ongoing crises that is probably worth mentioning. There's a lot of other stuff that I want to get to today, some of the other stories, and I think really big takeaways that are just not being discussed nearly enough because of all of the focus on Ebola. Ebola, they're coming for you. So not that it's a not serious issue, not that we shouldn't take note, not that it isn't concerning, but the thing that I really hate about the coverage, even in the alternative media, is the confused aspect of what people really want the government to do. And by that, I mean, we see the failure, the highlighting of the failure, rather, of government. Why doesn't government have body bags? Why don't they have hazmat suits? And on the same page or in the same light, you find people that are completely freaked out about this. The same exact people that want to know why the government would be buying body bags, why the government would buy 167,000 hazmat suits. So it's one of these weird deals where you want more government control. You're upset about the government not having complete power to quarantine and invoke martial law. But at the same time, you're very critical. Some of these exact same people are very critical of the government for not having the ability to do this. So I think that when it comes to what's happening with Ebola, or what we should be gleaning from this, is that you have to be careful what you ask for, what you want the government to do. But I think that we can highlight the fact that the police state that has been erected in this country, literally in the last decade, to the tunes of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars, is pretty ineffective at being able to effectively quarantine and go after people. So some of you out there, including myself, might find that a little heartening. The government can't necessarily just, lock down cities. There's a petition at whitehouse.gov for the shutting down of the country, basically, the isolation of the country for this emergency pandemic. So, Ebola today, what tomorrow? What other things might you quarantine the country? And just think about what that would do to the global economy. So people want some pretty Orwellian and draconian solutions to this whole issue. So whether it's aerosolized, what the government is telling us, whether that's accurate, we covered a lot of that on Doomcast just Thursday night with Charlie McGrath, and we talked a lot about Ebola and what the CDC and the government is doing and should be doing, and the just lackluster, very just amateurish approach to cleaning the throw up off of the sidewalks. If you didn't see the picture of them basically just taking a power washer and spreading Ebola puke all over the parking lot at this apartment where Mr. Duncan lived. And, the big problem is that people are scared of what might happen. And the government can basically say, well, we know that you came in contact with some person, and we're just going to lock you up in a house for weeks upon weeks upon weeks. I mean, these are powerful tools that the government will abuse, that people want. So that's what I gleaned from it. I don't know about all of the other things that, the possibilities, what's the likelihood that this came from Fort Detrick? What's the likelihood that this is a genetically specific bioweapon? Farrakhan had some interesting comments. And if there's something that I take away from this, is that there's almost nothing in the world that you cannot blame on the U.S. government at this point, and they have become this pinnacle for just about everything that's going wrong in the world. At least it seems that way. And is that giving the government too much credit? I think so, but it deserves it. It definitely deserves people to be hypercritical and always suspicious. And we've got plenty of fire or fuel for that fire that we're going to get into today here on this program. But interesting comments, and it seems that the politicking and the politicization of things like this Ebola scare, this potential pandemic that could wipe us all out. And I've been listening to a lot of alternative and mainstream media over the last couple weeks, and it's pretty amazing what people really do believe that this is all about. Some people believe that this is going to coincide and that they've brought the Ebola. They, of course, have brought the Ebola here, the government, to release this in tandem with the crash of the U.S. dollar. I'm sure some of you out there listening to this podcast have heard people talking about that. And it's just, failed prediction after failed prediction after failed prediction by many of the usual suspects. So, the scamming, the selling of cheap products that claim to keep you safe from Ebola, from, some of the usual profiteers, crisis profiteers, tragedy pimps, is a little disheartening. But I do believe that this is going to be used to further give the government more and more power. And I hear people in the alternative media, good people, nice people, people that I believe are really genuine, and being very critical that the government doesn't have these powers. Do you want them to have the power anytime that something might be released? Anytime? I mean, this is the most arbitrary reason to grab somebody and strip all constitutional rights from them. I mean, this is beyond martial law. It's a state of emergency that can be invoked at almost any time, and people are clamoring for it. Stop asking your government to solve everything, including Ebola. And they may have released it themselves. Anyway, that's all I want to say about Ebola, rather than the fear and getting ready and running and putting on your mask, which, it might be appropriate if you live with people that have Ebola. But the likelihood of you getting it at this point is pretty slim, pretty freaking slim. Measles is something that will generate, and it's just more prolific. It spreads faster. I don't know what you'd call it, but it just spreads much faster. It's much more contagious. And we've had some measles outbreaks, one in New York City just this year, and we didn't see a huge pandemic. But, I also find that, I know I'm putting out mixed messages here, but I always wonder, with the government's telling me to be calm, kind of makes me a little uneasy. And I'm sure many of you feel that as well when you have hundreds of quote unquote experts telling you to feel safe. It's all okay. It's all good. Don't worry. And you have this virus that's going around. I mentioned this the other night, and I'm sure a lot of you know about it. It's a national story. 4 children have died, maybe more at this point. Over 60 hospitalized. Those are old numbers, but by the time you're listening to this podcast, who knows where we'll be with either of these current strains of viral things that are, viruses taking off. I guess Ebola is not a virus, but you know what I'm saying. The flu season, who knows what it really is. The doctors don't know, but a respiratory illness is taking out a lot of children. And so, that's more concerning to me than even the Ebola virus, because that is easy to spread, and there's not the national attention or global attention on these mystery illnesses. And it just shows you how even with modern medicine, and even in a first world country like this, people still die. A lot of people die from the flu. A lot of people that are weak and susceptible end up dying with that. And I would wager that even if you have Ebola, if you were treated in a first world hospital, good chance you're going to live, even without the soon to be released by GlaxoSmithKline or some other brand of pharmaceutical corporation, latest machination. They'll have it there for you. The Ebola inoculations, the money and the demand for this new vaccine will be off the charts once they finally develop it. It even, pharmaceutical and tobacco companies are getting into this new healthcare issue. Facebook this week as well is now getting into the healthcare arena, which we talked about last podcast, how they have now, they're investing in having drones that will be able to beam to all of our devices directly. And I just think about the nightmarish hellhole that could become, and with Facebook linked to your health records and working and investing, because of course, they have no real moral ethics, or they've experimented secretly with their users and the like. So the idea that they would be a healthcare provider in the healthcare devices world just kind of scares the hell out of me. It's definitely not a good thing. And those are the kind of things that, obviously there's a lot of money and opportunities for the big Fortune 500 companies to invest in. Fear, there's a lot of money in that. A lot of money in it. All right, so there you go. There's your Ebola update. I think it's going to be used as a scam to bring in more power, more concentration, and the Department of Homeland Security will be involved more heavily in your healthcare, in screening people coming into this country. Some of you probably want that. Anyway, Hong Kong. We have some interesting protests, and, well, I mentioned it before, the United States government always there lurking whenever we have any kind of massive social uprising. So Moon of Alabama has this. The protest in Hong Kong, instigated by U.S. finance groups, were on the verge of ending in a fizzle. But now it seems that the talks by the students with their pro-democracy groups that are demonstrating with this very interesting new mobile peer-to-peer app that has ties to the intelligence agencies. We're not going to promote it, but it's been hailed as this new technology to get around the government. It's peer-to-peer, folks. We can use Bluetooth whenever we go to the protests. You got to, be suspect of any of that. Anything that's a centralized service. Occupy Central has already been criticized by many of these activists for playing a very instrumental role in trying to, instigate and level up the violence and, so far it hasn't been violent, but trying to take it to the next extreme. And that's where we're at today, where they're now saying that they should take over government buildings. Now, so far, the Chinese government has done its best to not even address the protesters. First, they just ignore you, right? It's the easiest way to mitigate the situation. Just ignore it. People get tired. They're going to go home. That's probably the easiest approach or initial approach for the state, which when you look at China, the corporatocracy, it takes a lot for it to veer away from day-to-day operations and doing what it does best, and that is producing cheap products for the world. So they have now taken note, and it may get a little bit more heated if the protesters start going after government buildings, trying to take those over. It forces the issue. It becomes more of a global issue, and there's definitely more focus. So I think that the Chinese government, just like most governments, would like to, not show their fangs, be able to say, yes, we're listening. Please go back to your homes. Nothing to see here. There is a real democracy. This is not a faux democracy that you have, or red democracy in China. Well, anyway, it didn't take long to start, I think, for the international community to start looking at who's funding these groups. None other than the National Endowment for Democracy, better known as NED. NED has given $460,000 through non-governmental organizations to operate in Hong Kong. Quote, similar groups, notably the U.S. National Endowment for Democracy, were involved in attempts to overthrow the governments of Georgia, Ukraine, Iran, Russia. They're very effective using social media to stir up discontent and spark large anti-government rallies. This is the same group that was heavily invested in the Arab Spring in Egypt, which didn't turn into much of an Arab Spring. And the U.S. government now working with the new dictatorship, the new military government, the whatever it is now. Pick your flavor of government that you'd like to call it. Some people would call it a democracy. I would call it a thugocracy, or some other witty little term to kind of identify how fake it is. So, of course, China's taking note of this. It's no surprise that wherever you have social movements to challenge the government, to give the government a little bit of a push, it's a great way to stoke a little fire and get a coup d'etat going, getting people, even if you don't want to directly focus or control these groups, but getting, them to light fires under the Chinese government and to become a threat and part of that kind of foreign policy is very popular. The U.S. has used that in many, 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 many cases. And we're going to mention a few more of them here, but this one is ongoing and current, so it's worth noting. So the National Endowment for Democracy, yes, $460,000 won't get millions of people going, but it's a good start. It'll get you some apps. It'll get you the Wi-Fi internet in a box so that you can go underneath or hit the subnet of the and have the backbone to be able to coordinate an attack on the Chinese government, a social protest attack, mind you. It is an attack on the day-to-day business of China. And it becomes now they have terrorism units. They have terror. That's a new thing that I would wager to say that the National Endowment for Democracy and other NGOs there have brought to the Chinese mainland. They didn't have a lot of terrorists in the last, they might have, but not not a whole lot of them over the last 20 years that were notable that, that other than, people hacking, school kids up and other weird things that happen in China that I guess happen anywhere, but, mass stabbings, stuff like that. And it wouldn't be anti-state, just crazy people doing crazy things, but not really orchestrated, organized terrorist attacks on state infrastructure. Now, I mean, you go back 100 years, it's pretty commonplace even in this country. But as of late, not a lot of that. Now, more and more and more. And is it a coincidence that you have more of these attacks coming at the same time along with huge social movements and protests? I don't think so. I think that the Chinese are going to see this as more U.S. foreign meddling, and really this is a soft terrorist attack. So the Chinese government is going to have to figure out how they're going to react to these social protests and movements, which I don't think are necessarily bad. That's the, I guess, argument for the National Endowment for Democracy. Is democracy bad? Is forcing people to make these changes, or not making changes, but forcing governments because of using ideals and the spreading of democracy, or I think capitalism would be a better way to describe what we have here, where money rules and money determines who is in charge of the country and who has the most power to affect change. That is capitalism. It should be the NEC, the National Endowment for Capitalism, raw, naked, crony capitalism. So, what happens now is the Chinese government reacts, and how they react is going to be interesting, because to this point, Tiananmen Square in the Chinese government's mind just never happened. It did not happen. No such thing. Everybody's happy. The problem is that their time has come, and it doesn't take much for the U.S. government to get people to realize the obvious. I guess that's my bigger point, or better point, is that these things, these ideas, their time has already come, and so it's really easy for the U.S. government to use that as a weapon, saying, "Look, you need to respect the individual, and people do need a Bill of Rights, and you should have representation with taxation." Some of the things, the ideals that, even though maybe just placeholders, we have these things like the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, and sometimes they're respected, and sometimes they're recognized, and sometimes they aren't. Sometimes they're just there. They just placehold in not enforced. But the idea is there, the general idea, and wanting your government to be more accountable. I mean, that's what Tiananmen Square was about. It wasn't so much that they wanted democracy or capitalism. They wanted more and true communism. And you want a real system that's not cronyism, and that's what you have in China. You have a capitalist society. I mean, at the heart, that does not value the individual. It's a collective that has been very effective in creating a financial and industrial engine, but that engine itself is pretty much failing. So, all right, we're going to bring back the stream, and I'm going to have to cut this thing together. Got it. Hey, welcome back to the stream. Okay. I was just railing about China. Their time has come at some point. It doesn't take much. The National Endowment for Democracy, if only $460,000 worth of pamphlets and other, I mean, you can't, that's not even enough to have, 10 people's salary. So I think that blaming a whole social media or event or a social movement event on the U.S. government because of the National Endowment for Democracy, although the U.S. government has funded many color revolutions, many of which we've highlighted in the show, it makes it, I think, almost a moot point. Things have to already be in motion. An idea's time has already come when you can push millions of people to do something with that very small amount of money. Now, the government has definitely been needling, the U.S. government, that is, in Chinese affairs for many years, and we're now starting to see some of the reasons that I think the government is so offended by the Chinese, and that is direct investments with Iran, sidestepping many of the OPEC nations, working directly with Russia, and the excluding of the U.S. dollar, and more de-dollarization, and lots of pretty provocative comments and posturing by the Chinese government. So, to kind of bring some perspective to what's happening today and what has happened in yesteryear, I think it's important to talk about the declassification of the Kissinger plans in Angola. Now, some of you old enough to remember may remember the state of Angola and the U.S. State Department's role in the coup d'etat and the democratization of Angola, and what Henry Kissinger had done as far as the orchestration and planning of these events. And so the U.S. government has a long history, and most of you listening don't need the history lesson in all of the interventionist ideas and plots and plans and coup d'etats that the U.S. government has been a part of. And that's why there's literally almost no credibility to what we hear about current day events. Looking to history to find out if we are getting the truth is a great way to know if we are going to get any semblance of truth out of our so-called elected leaders. So anyway, this came out this week from the National Security Archive, and I'll just read from it. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger ordered a series of secret contingency plans that included airstrikes and mining of Cuban harbors in the aftermath of Fidel Castro's decision to send Cuban forces into Angola in late 1975, according to declassified documents made public today for the first time. Quote, "If we decide to use military power, it must succeed. There should be no halfway measures," end quote. Kissinger instructed General George Brown of the Joint Chiefs of Staff during a high-level meeting of national security officials on March 24th, 1976. We go in, we crush them. That's basically the gist of this. And, of course, who was there in the war room? None other than Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, who said, quote, "I think we're going to have to smash Castro." Kissinger told President Ford, quote, "We probably can't do it before the 76 elections," end quote. And I agree. Jimmy Carter told Mr. Kissinger. So this was very, very offensive to the U.S. government that they would dare meddle in our little plans to meddle in Angola, a little African country that is very strategically important at the time, at least, to the U.S.'s role in the what we're seeing in Africa now, which is the aftermath 40 years later, AFRICOM, contingency plans, and to get the extractive resources under U.S. multinational and Fortune 500 control to continue to exploit and control those resources. The Congo Wars, the PlayStation Wars, what's happening with the colonization of it by Europe, China, Russia, and the United States. It's the wild, wild west, and it's the last unraped resource next to maybe the Antarctic, which, Rosneft and Exxon and Russia are doing their best, although sanctions are slowing some of that progress down. But that's really the war right there, is to control the assets, to control what is happening on the African continent. And I mean, that's as old as empire. Taking once just human manual labor from the continent, now returning for the rare mineral resources and the like. So, this is something that was conspiracy theory, that we would dare go after and assassinate leaders and try to kill our enemies for doing what we do, and that is sending troops somewhere to advance our own military and financial interests. I mean, that is U.S. plotting 101. We love to do it. We hate when Fidel Castro does it. Now, the argument that academics, wonks, and other people like that, the big thinkers, wink, wink, would say out there is that, well, Henry Kissinger wanted to bring real democracy to these places, and we all know what Fidel Castro was about. Sure, murdered massive amounts of civilians, his own population, starved them, solutions to his own bad policies. Let's just send all the bad people to America. We'll put them on boats. I mean, that happened just a few years later. And you talk about mining somebody's harbor. Castro did it almost better than the U.S. Here, we'll just give you all of our criminals and murderers, rapers, thugs, and other ne'er-do-wells and unemployed. We'll just send all of those people over on boats. That's a little turnabout is fair play, I guess. But ask the people in Miami how much they like that. Anyway, there's a secret elite national security team that was put together, the Washington Special Actions Group. Kissinger expanded on this scenario, called it the domino scenario. This new book that just came out about this, Back Channel to Cuba, the hidden history of negotiations between Washington and Havana, is being co-authored, and I'd like to get him on the show maybe if we have a chance, by university professor William N. Leo Grande, or Grand, probably it's French, Leo Grand, and Peter Kornbluh, who direct the National Security Archives Cuba Documentation Project research for the book, which reveals the surprising and untold story of bilateral efforts towards reapproachment and reconciliation, draws on hundreds of formerly secret records obtained by the authors. The documents detailing Kissinger's Cuban contingency planning in 1976 were obtained by Kornbluh through a Freedom of Information Act request to the Gerald Ford Presidential Library. So this is the kind of stuff that we don't have to look forward to, because look at Bill Clinton's presidential library, and it is under lock and key. You're not getting anything out of there. And maybe 40 years from now, after he's dead, we'll look back, because many of these people are pretty proud of the things that they've done. I mean, I don't think that Henry Kissinger feels bad about any of the butchering of the Cambodians or the Chileans and other things that his policy led to. He does not feel bad about it one bit. He doesn't. I don't even think it bothers him that he is an international war criminal and he's not allowed to go to certain countries, rightfully so. I don't think it bothers him a bit. I think that he's probably pretty, proud of this, and the fact that he's so old, and probably doesn't even matter anymore. I don't even know if he's, cognizant of what's happening around him. Anyway, so Mr. Kissinger was pretty upset about what Castro was doing, calling him a quote-unquote pipsqueak for the decision to deploy thousands of soldiers to assist with the popular movement for the liberation of Angola. So this is the crux. The book describes this ongoing intervention by the U.S. government, and Cuba, a little stab in the ribs to the U.S., said, look, we're going to send soldiers to help with this popular movement with the Party for Antonio Agostinho Neto, or Antonio Neto, against the attacks of insurgent groups that were supported covertly by the United States and apartheid regime of South Africa. So, I mean, nice people, really nice people. They were concerned that Castro would eventually broaden his military incursion beyond Angola. Kissinger considered or counseled Ford that they would crack the Cubans if they move into Namibia or Rhodesia. I would be in favor of clobbering them, Kissinger told the president, according to the 76 Oval Office memorandum conversation. So they had a contingency to go in there and assassinate all of these young men and women. They were not going to allow the U.S. to be projected and seen as weak. And that's what you start reading into this, and I can't get into all of it here on the show today, but when you really look at this, it's about perception management more than even the resources that they coveted. It was more about not allowing the Cubans and the Russians to upset the South African apartheid, and that was the biggest benefactors, the biggest players in that that decision. I mean, we were supporting apartheid. There's a lot of mines over there. I mean, when you look at the the miners, they're being mowed down by the South African government. I mean, you can't, I guess, blame apartheid or that imperial period for what's happened now. You could probably blame Nelson Mandela and other terrorists that the CIA and people like Henry Kissinger worked with and taught all sorts of very horrific tactics too, along with Mossad. Let's not mitigate Mossad's role in some of this. So when you look at the strategic interests, I know a lot of you that have really done your research and you look at all of the people, because that's what it takes. It takes a lot of common interests. The U.S. interest and Israel's interest, not always the same, but when it comes to the approach of controlling South African resources, absolutely. I mean, if you what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So more of this was about the fear that this could spread these ideas and to diminish the power of the United States. It's a pretty damning report. There's a bunch of really interesting documents, 9 of them, which we have linked up at blacklistednews.com from this article here, highlighting it from the National Security Archive, rather. Definitely worth looking at. I think it gives a broader understanding. So when you look at what we have today with ISIS and what, Rita Katz at the Site Intel Center, we have another beheading, another faux beheading, and I'm only going to say that because I haven't seen the beheading. It's being reported that there is a report, that there is a video where one of these, another nice American that was being held hostage was actually he was from I was watching the little piece because I thought, well, maybe they'll show the beheading. Absolutely not. But anyway, it's all over the internet. There's another beheading, as if that is the scariest and worst thing that could happen to people here on planet Earth. If you really think about it, even if we had a beheading in the Middle East every day, another beheading by ISIS, that's only 365 of them a year. And the brutality of so much of the war that is taking place, not only in Syria now and throughout Iraq and the battle between Kurds and other sects, it pales in comparison to the massive amount of genocide, I would call it ethnic cleansing, that's happening in the Ukraine, that's getting almost no media attention at all. So, that's where I think it's really important to kind of look back, because if you look at what happened with Russia and the dismantling of the chemical weapons in Syria, this is a huge problem. Okay, other countries solving the world's problems without the United States. Oh my God! And you can only imagine that the groups that they now employ to take care of these kind of problems are just a hair bit more brutal than even Kissinger's available tactics and resources at the time. I mean, the CIA was kind of in its infancy, and what it has become in the military-industrial complex is so much more complex and interconnected than it ever was. I mean, you look back to the overthrow of Mossadegh, even in Panama, Noriega. I mean, they didn't kill these guys. They still lived out their lives. Noriega's still alive. I don't know if he's living well, but they didn't kill people back then. It was a little more gentlemanly. Now it's very brutal. But you can only imagine how offended those in the State Department, the Victoria Newlands, the Robert and Richard Kagans, those type of people are, because of the Russians' ability to, spread the power of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and be able to counter U.S. interests. Hey, you don't like the U.S.? We've got an offer. We've got an offer on the table. And that's what the Cubans 40 years ago were offering those in Angola. And it's just like democracy or any other idea. It spreads like wildfire if it works out good for the people or, the government and those buying weapons. The Russians, I don't think are any better than or worse than those in the U.S. State Department. Their tactics are no better or worse than what Henry Kissinger proposed 40 years ago. Maybe a little less bloody, but in a little bit, I think, just probably a little bit more equitable for everyone in the sense that they're not interested in subjugating populations. They're more interested in making some money. Putin's a kleptocrat. Don't get him wrong. He's all about finding an opportunity to make him and his buddies some money, making his buddies money. That's what he's all about. I don't think I think it's quite inaccurate to think that he's trying to rebuild the Soviet Union. And so in that, I think you have a real viable alternative to the Anglo-Western New World Order, if you will. You have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. You have China. You have these other countries that they have gained a lot of power because of the concentration and let's admit it, the lack of rights that their populations have. It's really easy to do business when you don't care about the environment and nobody can vote you out of office. It's really easy to just people hail the economic rise of China. Look what China has been able to accomplish. Economists and industrialists are very impressed with the numbers and the output and the product. The people, they and the environment are, the cannon fodder, the expendables in that equation. So that's what Russia has been able to do. When you don't, not that they're nearly as, I shouldn't put them in the same bag as China, but not too far off. It's very statist. It's very centered around the common good of the state and the fact they have a pretty kleptocratic government. It's not necessarily horrible for the people, if you will. You go to Russia. I've had friends that have gone to St. Petersburg. There's nice places. It's not all bad. The government's not overwhelmingly in your stuff. That at least not visually. They might be monitoring everything you're doing, but that's no different than what you have in the United States. So is it better or worse, or are they more ethical? I just don't think they have as many rules, and I don't think that the people can complain nearly as much. It's one of the things that we have here, and that is at least a voice. They allow a voice, and that's what's absent in China and in Russia is a voice of the people. And Russia is rushing to get rid of free speech laws and all sorts of minor things that they can use to go after the people. But you say, oh my God, that's horrible, Doug Owen. The Russians, they're so bad. They don't want bloggers to be able to blog. It's true. It absolutely is. But David Cameron doesn't want you to be able to blog or put out, your viewpoints either. And the U.S. and the Russians and the Chinese all have one thing in common, and that is trying to figure out how to reel in this internet thing. It's really, really not working well. So in the aftermath, when we saw what happened in Angola, and you can be the judge, history has been the judge of whether or not the U.S. was very successful in the Angola revolution. Go to Angola right now and tell me what you think. I'd like to hear from you. You can text the show, 512-222-3060. 6-7. Hard choices. Hillary Clinton admits role in Honduran coup aftermath. This is pretty interesting because it's an admission after reading the Henry Kissinger's book, his book, World Order. And I would call it World Disorder, thanks to Henry Kissinger. Thanks to, what happens is if you're a wonk or an academic, you get very isolated from reality. You start getting farther and farther away from average people and what they care about and what ideals you should be instilling and what we should be doing, because the prize, the goal, the object of desire becomes just the focal point. You get blinded and you don't see peripherally what's really happening anymore. You get disconnected from the world. And so you hear the guys at the Brookings Institute, the National Endowment for Democracy, the International Crisis Group, all of these think tanks, Council on Foreign Relations. Some of them, I think, are people that want to see a better world, and you see that in their writings and in the conclusions and what they want. But they've lost sight of the human element that really this should be serving. Thinking about things in a very monochromatic, very, very black and white world is what I find most academics have done. Okay, so when it comes to the world order, you can be the judge of whether or not that's better. And I don't know. I mean, if Russia and China were leading the way and they were as powerful as the West, would the world look like a more humane and better place? I don't think so, really, honestly. So anyway, but not that Henry Kissinger or Hillary Clinton are doing all that well either. In a recent op-ed in the Washington Post, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton used a review of Henry Kissinger's latest book, World Order, to lay out her vision for, quote, sustaining America's leadership in the world. We have to maintain perceptions. Perception management is paramount. Getting people to think that, hey, and this is where the CIA plays a great role. When you think that everything in the world is being orchestrated by the CIA, don't you then believe that the U.S. has all of the power in the world, and that is a way to project that? So, I think it's an interesting approach, because every elected leader in South America, we saw Kirchner, the Argentine princess, she says that the U.S. government is planning to assassinate her. And I don't think that she's lying. I don't think that she's lying at all. And she's seen the writing on the wall. But here's the deal. They're about to go bust on bonds, and they've been borrowing into a hole for a long time. She's been on the New World Order teat, sucking that Fortune 500 cash for quite a while, and they are having bond defaults. Who does that piss off? Well, that pisses off JP Morgan. That pisses off hedge funds and people that have invested, because they lose. Now, this is, I believe that it's risk-based. You bet on a horse sometimes. Christine is just not going to do it. She just didn't do it, and they couldn't bring up that they just don't have the cash. So, it upsets the elite. They're like, you did not pay us back. This is global land sharking to the extreme. This is, this is a default. Well, I think that you have a justified fear, and I think that she's even vocalize this, because you realize that when you piss off the bankers, you might end up dead. But anyway, it's a great position to be in. Blame the U.S. The U.S. is doing this. This is why we can't pay our bills. And there is some truth to that. But it's like I don't know, buying or borrowing money from the payday loan people. Okay, if you're the president of a country, you should understand that the payday loan place is a scam. You should understand that, most of the people that go there are junkies and others that are just abjectly poor, that are living below their means or above their means. They can't. The reason that they're borrowing the money is because they don't have the money. And if you're borrowing money at crazy interest rates because you don't have money, you see where that goes. I mean, it's not that the payday lender doesn't understand what ultimately happens. They just know that 9 times out of 10 they win. It's an algorithm. It's a statistic. Okay, we're going to win most of the time. You're going to be desperate enough to come back and pay me because you know that you're going to need that fix or that bill paid or whatever it is, whether it's your cell phone, and they hit you up for other things while you're there. Here's a little free money, which is anything but free, and while you're here, you can send out a package via UPS. Anyway, you get into the scam. She got into the scam. People like Rafael Correa have and the Bolivian president have spoken volumes about how evil the U.S. is. And they are. They absolutely are. In a recent Washington Post op-ed, that the aforementioned, Miss Hillary Clinton brought up hard choices. She has this memoir that might be worth reading. The chapter on Latin America, particularly the section on Honduras, a major source of the child migrants currently pouring into the United States, has gone largely unnoticed. In letters to Clinton, her successor, John Forbes Kerry, more than 100 members of Congress have repeatedly warned about the deteriorating security situation in Honduras, especially since the 2009 military coup that ousted the country's democratically elected president, Manuel Zelaya. As Honduran scholar Dana Frank points out, in Foreign Affairs, the CFR, the U.S.-backed coup government, quote, rewarded coup loyalists with top ministries, opening the door for further violence and anarchy. The homicide rate in Honduras is already the highest in the world, so probably not a place you probably want to be necessarily. It's bad. 1 in 10 people are murdered by other people there. This actually increased by 50% between 2008 and 2011. Political repression, the murder of opposition political candidates, peasant organizers, and LGBT activists. Where are my femmes? Where are you at, ladies? Where are all the feminists and other very feminine guys that I guess there's butchy chicks too. Where are you at? You know, that's what just sickens me. The LGBT community and all of the political rhetoric doesn't actually try to protect their people. It just wants protective special interests that they can exploit. So here's an example of where, not in Russia, not in Putin's Russia or in Sochi, but rather in the U.S. State Department's militarily friendly coup government, we see this. You know, it's the beheadings of Western journalists that worry us so much. Really. I think that they're just killing the Western journalists that have been reporting on what's happening in Syria. I mean, it's a brilliant plan. Kill all of these journalists that are reporting, and many of which are probably CIA spies that you wanted to get rid of, maybe were potential whistleblowers, leakers, people like Michael Hastings. Have them beheaded on video, send it to Dr. Rita Katz. She'll get it out through the Intel Center, and then we'll have more Western media reporting on these horrific, atrocious beheadings. Meanwhile, our best friend and military ally, Saudi Arabia, beheads people. I mean, it's unreal. Beheadings are a pretty normal, everyday occurrence. Nobody cares. Nobody's offended by that. Nobody gives a crap that they're going after the LGBT community. Russia, though, that's a big problem. And that's how you know that it's a scam. And that's how you know that you're being scammed by the Western media, by the propaganda masters. Because if there really was an issue, we would be going towards it. If we were really offended about gay people being attacked and killed, you'd hear more about it. If it was really that big of a deal, Hillary Clinton wouldn't write about it in a book. She just knows that it's no big deal. And these people, as I said before, are proud of what they've done. We've learned things. My mistakes only had, tens of thousands of people murdered, but, whatever. We learn. I mean, it's like a doctor that just, after the 100th body, maybe I'm not a good surgeon. I don't know. Everybody keeps dying. Mixed metaphors. Anyway, so femicides skyrocketed. LGBT activist organizers killed. And I bet you a lot of them had national endowment for democracy money in their hands. The violence and insecurity were exacerbated by a generalized institutional collapse. Drug-related violence has worsened amid allegations of rampant corruption in Honduras. Police and government is out of control. While the gangs are responsible for much of the violence, Honduran security forces have engaged in a wave of killings and other human rights crimes with impunity. This is all linked up to mainstream media articles highlighting how effed up Honduras is. Thank you, Hilary Clinton. Now, the only thing that they don't say here is that the reason that they were able to institute this coup d'etat is because they knew that the U.S. State Department, the U.S. military, would not intervene. Not in so many words did they admit that they supported them pre-coup, but to think that the intelligence was not there and that the U.S. government did not know that this would happen, that is either a huge faux pas, the biggest lack of oversight and lack of, what was it with 9/11? A lack of imagination as to what could happen. But these crises that continue to paralyze the U.S. political sphere and the people of this country, quite frankly, we can lay at the feet of so many people like Hillary Clinton that have made so many bad decisions. The only way that we can learn from those decisions is to continue to highlight where they have gone wrong. She does that to a certain extent. I'll give her a little tiny crumb of credit for putting this truth to paper, but admitting that it was your approach and the projected approval of the coup is what really allowed it to happen. If they thought that the U.S. State Department and the Pentagon would be dropping in private mercenary contractors and troops, they thought that they would have a Ukrainian situation, this would not have gone forward. You have to have the U.S. State Department has been an enabler, and it's because of their strategic goals, what they wanted to accomplish. And this is the problem. You tell the CIA, well, we want this guy in. Okay, well, we'll do that. Similar situation in Cambodia, back in Vietnam. Well, we can do that. Yeah, we can run drugs, whatever you want. We'll figure out the way to make this thing happen. We'll create a golden triangle. They've done the same thing in South America. The recipe, the playbook has been almost exactly the same. So, big stories, big things that I think really highlight where we're at today. So when you hear about ISIS, would the government create something to a group to create the need once again to show U.S. power and how only the U.S. can resolve international issues that threaten the world? You bet your sweet bippy. Little callback to Goldie Hawn's famous reference. You bet. You absolutely bet. Would they create a State Department funded and completely CIA controlled boogeyman to scare the Middle Eastern countries into acquiescing to U.S. hegemony? You bet. You bet. Absolutely they would. And they probably are. And 40 years from now, my children will read about this and say, Dad wasn't such a crackpot after all. He was onto this. And it's not because I have a magic 8-ball or that you and I out there listening are that smart. It's common sense. You don't do things that are not in your interest. But people do things that they think are in their own interest all of the time that really aren't, that really are not self-serving. People go to payday lenders hoping to somehow get more money. And that's going back to the well of bad ideas and bad decisions. And that's what Hillary Clinton and Kissinger and the State Department have done over and over again. Is that what the Chinese government will do in reaction to this Western intervention? Is this what Russian leadership will do? That's really the question. It's the response. And it's really interesting to see how all of this is playing out. But because we have so many more politically aware, and I think at the end of the day, at the end of this podcast, we can all say, be careful what you wish for. I want to thank all of the people that have continued to support this show. It's commercial free and brought to you without interruption. Other than the stream sometimes dying out, we'll have to do a little post-production editing on it. But for the most part, you're not inundated with other solutions via cheap products being sold to you as a solution. I don't think that is a very honest or uncompromisable way to do business. That's why we do it like this. If you find value in the podcast, show us your value. We'll continue to speak truth to power to bring a reasonable voice to some of the chaotic news and headlines. And it doesn't only just support the show, it supports all of the endeavors, the work that we do with the Doomcast, with BlacklistedNews.com, the daily aggregation of news, and all the efforts and time, really, that we put into not only doing this show, but all of it. And so I want to thank you out there that have continued to support us in the past. Of course, BlacklistedNews.com is where you can get all of the headlines. You can follow us on Twitter there. BLN Radio is my personal handle. And you can get news, updates, all of that there. Blacklisted Radio. Sign up for the newsletter. We put those out periodically. And subscribe to the Spreaker channel. That way you'll get emails whenever the show goes live. I want to thank all of you for being part of this broadcast. We'll do it again next Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. Until then, take care, my friends.